September. Sorry, welcome everybody to our September meeting. We're really excited to talk today about kind of all the things that IWB has been doing this summer. We've had a lot of people working on a lot of different things. So we'll kind of spend today recapping a few of the events that we helped with at NACOB, which is our North American Congress on Biomechanics. And then we'll also hear from a few of the IWB members who organized the World Congress of Biomechanics Women in Science event a little bit later in the meeting. So with that, I will share our screen. We have a few announcements, and I will pass it off to Anna Maria to kind of get us started with the announcements.
Hi, everybody. So I have some announcements about our upcoming meetings. In October, we are going to have presentations where you can share your research. In November, we invite you to present about how to get undergraduate students involved in biomechanics. And the December meeting will be about holiday social. So we are going to play them. Can you? Yeah, okay. So we invite you to talk about your research in a safe environment in the October meeting. Maybe you are about to go to a new research environment where you would need to present your research. Then this would be a great opportunity for you to practice. Or maybe you are going to be on the job market soon and give a presentation and let us support your research journey. And you can also get valuable feedback that can help you improve. And you can also add this presentation to your CV. And the next, yeah, thanks. So in the November meeting, we invite you to talk if you have any experience how to get undergraduate students involved in biomechanics. Maybe you have some mentorship tips or any project results or available internships. Or maybe you are an undergraduate student and you can share your experience why you started to do research in biomechanics. And for these presentations, for the October meeting, the presentations could be 10 minutes long, and for this November one, they should be 5 minutes, something like that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber. And yeah, just one more quick announcement we have is that, again, please check out the IWB blog. If you didn't see in our general channel, we had a really positive experience from one of our members saying that a company reached out to her after reading her blog and kind of offered her a job interview, which was really cool. So these blogs are great opportunities to communicate your science, practice science communication, but also to put your name out there and hopefully get a little bit more exposure. We know how much kind of networking and branding matters in research and in biomechanics. So, please consider writing a blog. I know Kat is going to talk a little bit more about some blogs that we have coming up, but Aurelie also wrote some really fantastic blogs on mental health recently. So please check those out. Okay. So one more thing before I switch over to the NACOB presentation. We have now a repository of women in science events where if IWB or any women in science event has occurred, we would like to be sort of the group that collates all those resources and helps make sure you have one spot to look for everything. So if you wanted to replicate a smaller version of a Women in Science event at your institution, you could use those resources and so on. We started this Google Drive folder. You can go to the bit.ly link. Maybe somebody could also post it in the chat. I can also post it later. But the bit.ly/women in biomech events. We already have a couple in there. We have the NACOB Women in Science event that we had, and I think Katie started a folder for us for women, World Congress of Biomechanics as well. And then we have a few more events from previous advancing women in biomechanics events that we'll also share in there. But we do have a resources and repository committee that is working on kind of all these sorts of, sorry, resources. So yeah, we can, thanks Ashley for posting it, so we can use that. Okay, with that, I will get us started and talk a little bit about NACOB. We had several groups working on this, including International Women in Biomechanics, Alison Cloutier in Canada, and myself were working on the IWB side. We had several members from ASB and CSB, including Ajit Chowdhury, who's the ASB diversity chair, and then Novell, we had Maria Pasquale, and several others, Jill McNick-Gray, Mary Rogers, others working on this. So it was a big effort, but the whole theme was elevating and championing each other through sponsorship, and kind of how we can communicate and inspire confidence for women and underrepresented genders in the community. So we did some socializing. We also did 30 minutes of roundtable discussions. We mostly talked about this one article, which is called "Don't Just Mentor Women and People of Color, Sponsor Them." And you can find the link to that as well, bit.ly/sponsor WIS. But it's a really great article, and it kind of talked about 4 big categories of sponsorship tactics: amplify, boost, connect, and defend. So really the majority of those roundtable discussions were talking about those different tactics and very tangible and actionable ways that all of us could practice those tactics in our community, whether we are a student or a professor. You know, it didn't matter the status level or anything that we had. Like, we can all be practicing sponsorship for our community. We don't necessarily need to be, you know, the dean of our department. There's many ways to be a sponsor. So there's some examples there. And in the end, ultimately, we had an idea boards, and I can share this link as well. But if you would like to, if you ever think of more actionable items, that's going to be an open website. You can look on at any time. We were able to like kind of upvote different sticky notes on the idea board and share some actual items. So I'll go through a few of these, but I would love to kind of stop sharing my screen in a little bit and then have whoever was at the event, we'd love to hear from you. What did you take away from it? What was your like roundtable discussions like? Because we heard a lot of good things, but we actually hear from the audience today too. So in terms of amplify, I think a lot of people talked about, you know, a really popular one was not referring to PhD students, sorry, as my PhD student, but instead referring to them as a PhD student that works with me, and kind of changes the perception or presentation of them as an equal in the research process. That was a really great idea. Using Twitter and other social media to highlight somebody's work, showcasing your student in a PowerPoint presentation, even having, you know, those pictures can be very helpful. Just a way to amplify the research and the people behind the research, and talking about a student's poster to another PI that's looking for a postdoc or a position, and highlighting others' achievements. We also talked a lot about how to boost. So, you know, writing a letter of recommendation for a student who maybe had a bad experience with their primary mentor, and you can kind of step in and be that person that says, you know, I can vouch for this person, like they had a bad experience in another lab, but I know this person, and so on. There's also a lot of ways to write a letter of recommendation that avoids a lot of microaggressions, you know, using sort of gender terms for women that aren't used for men, like, oh, you know, she was she was a good team player, or she was very nice, things like this that don't necessarily speak to the research skills. Those happen more in letters of rec to women than to men. So kind of acknowledging those, how we can get better at letter of recommendation, inviting grad students from different institutions to give a talk, advocating and providing space for younger students and generations to become potential researchers, writing personal rather than generic recommendations. Again, that's something we can all work on. And then there's a lot of ideas for connecting, getting your lab mates to introduce you to their connections. That's something any of us can do. Ask your students before a meeting if there's anyone they would like to connect with. I think that can be really, really powerful, because then when you're at the meeting, you can say like, oh, my student wanted to meet you, and then inviting students to attend who are attending on their own to kind of have dinner together with your lab. Again, just finding ways to build community. And it was really nice. I think one of the first nights of the conference on Sunday, Alexa Johnson helped us plan a IWB social, which I heard, I wasn't able to attend, but I heard really great things about how people were able to like meet in person for the first time and actually get to see each other. And that was a way to, we all have a common bond of being part of this women in biomechanics community. So we should take advantage of it. And then finally defend, again, just calling out gender bias if you see it, encouraging your male colleagues and other colleagues to be aware of these microaggressions that often occur to women and underrepresented genders. You can, again, defend a person who I know has confidential challenges. So if you know something about somebody that they don't want shared, you can still advocate for them without, disclosing their challenges. And then I like this one is I will defend myself as well as I defend others. If that feels hard, I will imagine myself as someone else who needs to be defended. I think that can be something really challenging to stand up for ourselves, but we can make it a mission, we can make it a mantra and internalize that. Yeah, and so there was a lot of really great suggestions. Again, this idea boards, I'll post in the chat, it's open. So if you have other ideas, please feel free to share. I will just end real quick with this presentation and say a big thank you. We had over 15 facilitators. I haven't named them all, but they were both men and women who attended and were eager to help us kind of facilitate these conversations. We also want to thank our wonderful MC for the evening, Dr. Sylvia Blemker. And then again, that's the list of people that helped. So Ajit, Allison, Diana, Jill, Maria, and Mary Rogers, they all were big help in putting together this event. So with that, that was a quick summary. I will stop sharing my screen for a moment so that maybe we can talk as a group for maybe 5 minutes. And what did you guys take away, or what was your experience at the meeting?
I can go. Yeah, this was an awesome event. I was at NACAB, and yeah, it was really great conversations. Our table in particular had people at like all different career stages. So like we had undergraduate student to grad, postdoc, all the way up through kind of more senior faculty members. So it was fun to be able to kind of chat with each other, kind of from like both the perspective of who has been amplified and like kind of, or boosted or defended, and also like probably from the more senior people who have had a chance to do those actions more often. So it was nice to kind of chat it from these different perspectives of kind of ways, and back to that point of like seeing PhD students as collaborators and part of kind of equal process, right? It's like we are also kind of finding ways to like all be part of this, doing these ABCs and working together. So what's fun.
Thanks for sharing, Katie, and thanks for being a part of it. Did anyone else attend and want to share? Okay, if not.
I can just echo kind of what Katie said. I think for me, as first conference goer, it was really nice just to kind of be in a space with other women. My table was all women, and so we were able to talk a little bit just more about some of the challenges that we faced and then how to address them. And, you know, people were able to ask more specific questions about like, if this situation comes up, and we kind of like worked through it together. And that was really nice. And it was pretty clear that we had all faced very similar challenges and great ways that people do the ABCDs as well. So I guess that it was just nice to have that perspective.
I completely agree with the others. It was a massively valuable session. And one of the things that I noticed and took away is that when we were going around the table and everyone was kind of sharing examples of when they had either used or had done to them one of these kind of techniques, and how much of an impact it could have on somebody. You know, people were saying there was this one time when somebody stuck their neck out for them and they remembered it, and it made a real difference to how they felt about their work and their working environment. So something that might have seemed reasonably small to that person, they might even have forgotten it, had a really long lasting impression on somebody and really made a difference. So it's worth it.
I'll add also, someone from our group had a great suggestion that next year we should revisit how people used their ABCDs over the past year, which I think would just be a fun little exercise.
That would be awesome. Yeah, we can do like a check-in maybe in August 2023 and say like, yeah, how have you
I just asked, did they announce where the next one will be located?
Okay, Ashley, did you say Vancouver is the next one?
Yes, yeah, I think World Congress
Yeah.
next one is Vancouver in 2020.
24 or 26.
Yeah, I think.
Oh,
26.
wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I
World
didn't-
is every
Yeah.
4.
Or you,
NACOB, I don't know, it apparently happens randomly, but ASB will be in Tennessee.
Oh, really?
yeah,
That is
Yeah,
honestly
yeah,
my
so-
stomping ground. So what part of
yeah,
Tennessee?
it's gonna be in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee.
That's a rival, but okay. Okay. I keep that in mentally.
Yeah, so ASB is in Knoxville. I think it's like early August. I want to say like 8th through 11th ish. And also there's a international biomechanics meeting next year. In somewhere in Japan, I think.
Yeah,
In
Tokyo, I think.
I think it's the week
Is it?
before ASB. It's like the 31st.
Okay,
to the
they're
5th.
close to each other.
So ASB, not ISB. ASB is in Knoxville next year. Okay.
Yeah, and ISB is in Japan next
Okay.
year.
Thank you.
And ISBS
Yeah.
is the US somewhere. Milwaukee? I probably pronounced that wrong.
Milwaukee.
There we go. There we go.
That's fine.
Milwaukee,
Oh.
y'all not gonna have a lot to do there in your downtime, but okay.
Wow.
know.
I don't think calls for abstracts have gone out yet. It seems like they're usually like the ISB ones, I think are usually more like December, like
Yeah.
January-ish timeline. And then ASB, it seems like those are usually like early March deadlines. But I haven't seen calls for any of them yet.
We get a bit of time to recover and actually do some science.
Yeah.
A little.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think, and we can post them in Slack as soon as they show up. Anna, you might at least see the ASB ones first. And
I can
as the
definitely post
secretary.
those. Yeah. Julia, are you part of? Sorry to call you out. I just saw you nodding a lot. Are you part of the ISBS? Or?
No, I like started my program and then COVID
Oh,
And I haven't been able to get anything in person, and I finally have research done because I was finally able to see human
Yay.
subjects. And so I'm like really gearing up. And if I can get an excuse to go to Japan and, you know, share some research, I'd really like to go to Japan and share some research.
Awesome.
I hope so too.
That is the way you choose your conferences, of course. You decide
Yeah.
where you would like to go and then find the conference that's there.
Julie, I take the same thought process. I'm like, of Japan, Knoxville, Milwaukee, which one would I try to go to? So
I do the same thing. I just tell my advisor at the beginning of the year, I want to go to these conferences. And then later it comes out, that one's, you know, in a different country.
Well, one more thing I wanted to mention, I hope it's okay, Katie, to mention this, but one of the suggestions, I think Missy Morrow, who was the ASB Awards chair, mentioned is like having a group together to help other women nominate each other for all these awards. So Katie Knaus has very graciously offered to help IWB kind of set something up like that. So if you're interested in helping with something that, you know, kind of helps us keep track of all of the possible biomechanics awards from these different societies, and we can all kind of collectively use our group to like help each other nominate each other for awards, or help each other with applications, you know, read each other's applications. That's what this group is for. So I'm gonna plug for that.
Yeah, thanks for the plug. Yeah, start a channel on the Slack probably is a place to get started. And I was initially going to start kind of with ASB and ISB related awards, but I would love if people are part of other societies, groups, you know, to weigh in on that and help out, because it'd be great to see more women winning awards. And I think if we combine our efforts, there's lots of good ones to nominate. So.
And also going to call out Cheryl because she won an award at NACOB. I think it was a poster award, if I remember. So congratulations, Cheryl. But yes, we should all collectively work on more awards for women in. Okay, cool. With that, if you have any other comments, feel free to share in the chat or anything. But I will pass it off, I think, to Kat, who is going to talk about quickly the Diversifying Your Workforce event that we have.
She is indeed, if she manages to share her screen, which hopefully she has now succeeded in doing so. Yes, so another International Women in Biomechanics, or another event that International Women in Biomechanics were involved with at NACOB was the Diversifying Your Workplace workshop that was held on the Sunday immediately before the conference. And this was a collaboration with the Black Biomechanics Association and Latinx in Biomechanics. Shout out at the beginning to Kayla Seymour from the Black Biomechanics Association, who did a huge amount of work in orchestrating this and pulling it all together, and to the very large number of people from all of these organizations that were involved in putting together resources and making sure the workshop ran really well. So the purpose of this basically was to offer people tools and resources to try and help attendees to promote and to enact diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in their own workplaces. The idea was to keep it practical and action-based rather than just let's go through all the problems that we already know about. So the objectives were to critically examine the barriers in health science and engineering to those from diverse backgrounds, discuss effective implementation of sustainable DI initiatives at a variety of different professional workplaces and levels, and to instill people with confidence, hopefully, or increase their confidence, and to actually make changes towards more diverse and inclusive and equitable workplace environments. The way it was structured was we had 5 speakers or 5 groups of speakers, some people presented in teams, and we had 2 hour-long discussion sessions, one at the end of the first 3 and then one after the final 2, in which people were able to move around between, keep calling them round tables. We had no actual tables there. I think we ended up referring to them as pods, but discussing these ideas and working with the resources that were shared and that people were able to take away to kind of share ideas for how we actually implement these ideas that are prompted within the talks practically. So we had Dr. Andrew Mitchell from University of Bedfordshire in the UK, Evan Dooley from University of Virginia, Dr. Alexa Johnson from Michigan, Dr. Frankie Wade from University of Florida, and Dr. Michelle Jones-London from the NIH-9's Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Diversity. So we had a variety of people speaking at a variety of different kind of career stages and within academia and outside academia. And what I was going to do today is just very much do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the kind of key ideas and take-home messages and areas that were covered in the presentations that were given and the discussions that we had, in order that people can then go away and look at the resources. Some of the talks were given online, and so they were videoed, and the rest we have slides for that the presenters have kindly allowed us to share. So they will be made available within our resources folder, so people can go away and look at them. All the speakers have provided contact details and said they're happy to have discussions with people. At least one of them I know is in this meeting, so you can ask questions immediately afterwards, but just as a taster. So first up, we had Andrew Mitchell and Ramanda Dillon, who were discussing reducing the attainment gap in biomechanics and sport and exercise science. And this was a bit of a UK perspective, because that was where they were both based, and because this is something that is taken quite seriously in a kind of standardized way across institutions in the way that particularly assessments are delivered and marking is done. So the attainment gap is the difference in good degrees, so that would be a 2-1 plus or 2-1 or a first in the UK, that are awarded to groups of university students that have the same grades at entry when they first come into the university. And we know that white students on average receive higher awards than students from all other ethnic groups. And the biggest awarding gap, which is nearly 20%, is for students that identified as Black. And this obviously has implications that extend beyond undergraduate study through to career options and postgraduate opportunities, and so on. So the main take-home points from this talk were that the action needs to focus on the institutional barriers and inequalities that are there, rather than targeting the students as needing improving or fixing, which has been a little bit of a narrative in the past. Traditionally, that narrative focuses on underachievement and lack of attainment from these students, whereas it's more valuable and productive to focus on the institutional culture and the curriculum and so on. Initiatives take time to have impact, so institutions have to be patient. You can't do a kind of one-hit wonder and throw a small pot of money at the problem and expect it to be solved. Students should be centered in the actions that are taken, and they should be involved in the discussions. And that a useful starting point, at least, is to adopt blind marking and grading, which is where marking and assessment is done with the student's name and details obscured from the person that's marking the work. And that can be implemented quite easily through Moodle and Canvas and a lot of the virtual learning environments that we use. Dr. Ramanda Dillon then followed and as part of this talk and presented a really interesting case study from the University of East London, funded by the Office for Students in the UK, for a programme that was designed to support students from groups typically associated with an attainment gap. And she shared some of the feedback from that programme as well, which will be made available if you look at the resources. So that was our first discussion. So we were focused really there on students, particularly at undergraduate level. We stayed with students for the second presentation, which was given by Evan Dooley. So here the emphasis was on student voices and leadership, particularly in the student research environment. So students are future of research. They bring new perspectives. They distribute the workload within a lab group. And as Evan said, they provide a renewable energy source in terms of the enthusiasm that they bring in and the new ideas and the work that they produce. And so it was highlighted that there's students should be included at every level, not just at the bottom level within a single, a lab group that they might be involved in. And there was a discussion of the value of an inclusive leadership model rather than a purely hierarchical model. So involving students at every stage, the value associated with it in encouraging buy-in, allowing for and encouraging bidirectional feedback and increasing motivation in everyone. There were examples given of ways of implementing this model at organizational level through student committees and representatives, at institutional level, input into curricula and student policy, and at the level of an individual research lab through training structure and lab culture. On to presentation 3. So here we had a team of 4 presenting. That was led by Dr. Alexa Johnson. So here we discussed barriers to inclusion for LGBTQIA+ and gender non-conforming people in biomechanics. So why were we here? What was the point of the talk? The idea was to learn how to support LGBTQ+ biomechanists. And the ideas that the group put forward and discussed were to do with normalizing the sharing of pronouns for more inclusive spaces. Your assumptions about someone's pronouns might be wrong, and using yours makes it less awkward for people who are transgender or genderqueer to use theirs. They highlighted the idea, again, themes that follow through multiple presentations, of the importance of inclusion everywhere and in every level. So in the lab or the workplace, in hiring practices and in handling everyday encounters, at the department or the institution level, so in how pronouns are shared and how that's normalized, in bathroom provision and in advocacy, and in research. So in the way that we ask for and collect participant demographic information, thinking carefully about what information is it that we actually want to know from people, and also how do we present the questions and how do we ask them? Do you shout them across a lab, or do you put them on a paper form that you ask somebody to fill in? They discussed the importance of not outing people, allowing them to make the decision, and understanding that that's a decision that has to be made every time somebody goes into a new environment or meets a new person. It's not just a one-off activity coming out. And again, conversation about how being an ally requires action. It involves listening to people, correcting yourself if you make a mistake without being over the top about it, calling out issues that you see respectfully, and thinking before you ask intrusive questions. So if you wouldn't ask them to a cisgender straight person, is it appropriate to ask them to somebody that you perceive might not be? This was a summary slide for take-home messages. So the importance of acting on your allyship, not making assumptions about people, using inclusive language, knowing your resources ahead of time, and doing research on how to be a useful ally, and being conscious about these things. There's lots of intersectionality to deal with in these areas, and that everyone does their best work when they're able to bring their whole self to whatever environment that they're in. Then we moved on to challenges that face international scholars. So this is Dr. Frankie Wade's presentation. And it started with an overview of the extent of these challenges. So large proportion of doctoral recipients in the US are on temporary visas, and that proportion is increasing over time. And there are a lot of misconceptions about international scholars and international students. So discussion that the group had come across, that the group had amongst them, the idea that all international students are really wealthy, they don't contribute to the economy, there are language barriers, that means they can never really be included, and that they're disconnected from the culture that they have come into. There's some really insightful and thought-provoking reminders, I suppose, of the challenges facing international scholars. So cultural challenges associated with potential language barriers, experiences with different education systems, experience of being otherized, a loss of identity, and active discrimination. 50% of international students had a 2007 study said had experienced discrimination. Challenges with visas and immigration. Frankie said she couldn't overestimate just how incredibly stressful the process was. It's expensive, it's slow moving, there could be restrictions on things like conference travel. This is a huge kind of additional burden that international students can face. Challenges with finance. You can't just put a conference on a credit card if you've got no credit history and hence no meaningful credit limit in the country that you've just moved to. Potentially needing co-signers for leases, difficulty with being able to travel, potentially being alone on holidays if you can't travel back home and you don't know anybody in the country that you've moved into. Scholars with spouses and dependents have a whole load of additional challenges on top of that. So if you're working with somebody or you take on a student that has those challenges, then have the conversation with them and find out what support they need. And just things like the expense of having to get academic transcripts transcribed over and over again. Also challenges with scholarship. A lot of funding schemes you're not eligible for if you're not a citizen of the country that you're in. You're not eligible for a lot of training programs, and hiring justification often requires essentially the person that wants to hire you to explain why you're not just as good as, but better than anybody that is from the country that you're living in at the time. Action items that we finished with at the end of this presentation were one, take the time to understand the visa compliance requirements for international students and for the colleagues that are working with you. Have a list and carry a list of funding sources that are available to non-citizens. Challenge xenophobia wherever you see it, call it out. Open access resources are really important for your students and for other people that you work with. And there's a discussion about the importance of making sure that we make things available to people so that they can be accessed from, people who might have institutional barriers to getting to accessing the resources otherwise. And start conversations in your department or in your workplace about equity of support for international students in your department, particularly given all these additional challenges that they face. So Frankie is in this meeting, I believe, or at least she was when I started the talk, so we'll no doubt be able to, we'll be happy to answer questions afterwards or to correct me on anything where I've outrageously misinterpreted her. But final presentation then, to summarize before we move on. So here we had Dr. Michelle Jones-London from the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke to talk about the strategies for enhancing diversity of neuroscience researchers. And there was a lot of really applied and practical information in this presentation about opportunities available to mostly to US-based researchers for pursuing work in these areas. But I pulled out just a couple of key points from the presentation here. This was recorded, so you'll be able to view the whole thing later on. But some of the things that were highlighted were, one, inclusion isn't just diversity by numbers. So just adding diverse people to an otherwise homogenous environment isn't what creates a welcoming situation for people. I like this one as well. As scientists, our job is to deal with difficult, complex problems day in, day out. So don't accept it's too hard for dealing with or challenging these equality, diversity and inclusion issues. We're experimenters, so experiment with change and see what works. She also gave an overview of useful strategies to deal with implicit bias, the importance and the value of inclusion and mentorship and practical approaches to making it work for you and for the people around you. Some tips for avoiding gender bias in references that was alluded to earlier in the discussion of the Women in Science event. So things like emphasizing people's accomplishments rather than using sort of grindstone type effort adjectives, which are 50% more likely to be used for women than they are for men. And this point, which I took away as well, is what gets measured gets done, and what gets rewarded gets repeated when we're talking about organizational structure and senior leadership. So it's worth measuring the institutional climate and the tone, and making diversity goals explicit, and fostering development of strategies to achieve them. And this was her final slide, which I thought was probably quite a useful final slide for this presentation as well. So that was just a very kind of whistle-stop tour of everything. I didn't have the time to convey all the kind of really valuable discussion points that the speakers were able to tease out and the suggestions that they were able to make. But I will make, as I said, the links to the presentations that were video presentations available, and the slides for the presentations that were delivered in person. So you can spend more time going through these resources. Alexa is also putting together, or bringing people in to get involved in, a series of IWB blogs that will focus on each of these presentations one at a time, and again provide the background behind the talk and the key ideas that should be highlighted. There's also a set of resources that are associated with all of these presentations that the organizational group developed and put together, and include the contact details of people involved and links out to external resources. So those will be shared at the time that the blog comes out. So please look out for those and use them, because they are they're really useful, and hopefully everybody will be able to get a lot out of them. I'm done.
That was amazing, Kat. You like summarized 4 hours.
Like, right, how do I do a day's workshop in about 15 minutes?
That was incredible. I felt like, yeah, you touched on all the really key points. I'm glad we have this recorded, because like people can go back and watch this. I think that was a great summary. Thank you.
Not a problem. Right, I need to unshare my screen, don't I? Unless someone can do that for me. Hang on. What?
Did anyone have like maybe a quick question or so before we do want to make time for the World Congress in Biomechanics as well?
I was curious if for the international students, one of the action items is having a list readily available for international students to find sources of funding so that you can help them with that process. That's a big part of what I do as a grad student in my department, specifically for NSF graduate student awards. And I was wondering if you had any tips on where to find those lists for international students that I can better help my peers.
Can I throw this one to our speaker, Frankie Wade, if she's...
Yeah, I'll unmute.
There we go.
Please forgive the sweaty face. I'm doing my workout. Figured I would multitask. So kind of the point that we had was...
Oh, gone.
Frankie, you muted again. Oh no.
We've lost
There we
her.
go.
There we
I'm
go.
back. Sorry. Yeah, one of the challenges that we face is these lists don't exist yet. And so one of the things that I would love to do is crowdsource that. So as international scholars apply for funding or find funding that they're eligible for, if we have some kind of central repository that we can kind of report, hey, there's this funding thing here. And so we can start to curate that list and host it on something like American Society of Biomechanics or ISB or any of these sort of big societal pages, I guess. So the list doesn't exist yet, but I would love to create one and make it easily available for everyone.
Awesome.
Okay, just so to make sure we have time for Katie and Ashley, I'm gonna share my screen and pass it to Katie, but please feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. Go ahead, Katie.
Thanks. All right, so for our tour to event, I just did one big slide. So our event was at the World Congress of Biomechanics, which was mostly a virtual event. And so our Women in Biomechanics event ended up being virtual. And what we did was, it was kind of a combined event that was both a mentorship panel and a skills workshop. So I'll tell a bit about maybe the panel, and then Ashley, do you want to kind of chime in after me and you can tell a bit more about the workshop? Okay, so this event was super fun. We had like a really awesome team of women that I feel like we worked for like over a year of planning this, and we weren't sure if it would be in person or what would happen, but it was a fun process along the way. So ultimately we had this panel come in, and we focused our panel on mentorship. And part of this came, we actually may remember we sent polls out to our IWB membership earlier in the year and kind of asked like what sort of career development things would be interesting to talk about in this sort of event. And a lot of the responses we got were really focused on mentorship, or things that we felt kind of were within the scope of mentorship. So that was where we focused, and we invited 4 awesome speakers here, Annie, Lauren, and Sylvia, who all kind of came in and shared their wisdom. And so kind of also crowdsourcing from our IWB, we used those surveys to help generate some questions that we asked to our mentor panel. And I couldn't put like all the amazing things in here, but I'll shout out, Anna was like our live tweet extraordinaire. And so if you scroll back to like the IWB Twitter from, when was this? This was like July, I think it was the 13th or 14th, depending on what time zone you were in. You can look at the tweets of like all the amazing things our panelists said, but we focused, a lot of questions were kind of based on like how to be a mentor and like what mentorship meant to them. And so they gave some really great advice. I pulled a few, like a quote from each speaker, but Lorraine Furlong said about mentoring, to answer the question that's been asked, not the question you've prepared for. So really kind of meeting your mentee where they're at and addressing their needs. And so having those conversations instead of just kind of coming in with your own idea of what a mentee might need. I love Lauren Welt's comment of seeing your mentees as whole people. So we were talking about kind of meeting, we're researchers and scientists, but also have whole lives and lots of stuff that goes on outside the lab. And so how do we kind of mentor people with that in mind and kind of, work with them as whole people and not just scientists. We also had some really great discussions about a lot of talk about kind of how to be yourself in academia and how to avoid burnout, and like a lot of issues that I think get piled on women or minority genders more often is kind of these burdens of service. And so Annie had this great tip to assemble a no committee, which was kind of in the context of like, if you're kind of asked to take on multiple things and you like don't feel confident on your own of like which ones to say no or yes to, like have kind of people in your corner who you can turn to and it's like, is this something I want to take on? And so kind of work together and have your no committee to help you not overburden yourself and then burn out on the things you really want to dedicate your time to. And we talked about kind of like, especially women, there's some like often get advice of how to like behave or act to kind of be seen as professionals in our workspaces. And I love this from Sylvia where she said, academia is going to change when we all embrace being ourselves. So part of being mentors is helping not to shape mentees to kind of be just like you, but to help them kind of be the best version of themselves and to support each other. I think this ties in really nicely with like the NACOB event of these kind of amplifications and boosting, where it's more about not giving advice of how to do a thing or be a certain way, but how to kind of embrace your individual selves and bring that to academia, because I think that will make it a more interesting space for everyone. So there were many more great quotes. I encourage you to scroll through Twitter where we recorded a few of them, but it was great. So that was kind of the first half of this event, was this panel discussion. And then we moved into what we call the skills workshop. So I'll let Ashley tell you a bit about that.
Yeah, so the skills workshop was led by Melissa Boswell and Hannah O'Day, so our Boom podcasters, and this is a really great workshop that they put on, and I believe the slides are available. The QR code there goes to the worksheet that we all did, that our panelists did, and really what this was focused on were different areas of we call them like core competencies for research. And so some of them are research related, but then there were things like interpersonal skills, intrapersonal skills, and how you kind of handle all of those things. And you do a self-reflection on this, give yourself a score, and it automatically totals things up and tells you maybe which area you need to work on and grow in your future work. So we did this, and we talked a little bit with our panelists about maybe the best way to find mentors for a specific skill area, because it might just not be who does the research that you are interested in doing. I don't know if I have any specific quotes written down. I think I wrote them all down from the earlier questions. But I think for myself, it was really helpful to go through the skills worksheet and kind of pull out maybe create more specific goals for myself around some of the softer skills that we don't necessarily think about every day. And we've talked with Melissa and Hannah, and I think we're going to try to do a version of this workshop in the future that they can kind of share out with all of us. I think WCB recorded the session, but it is not easily accessible. So we're going to try to relive the magic there.
Yeah, for sure. Because also, like, it was a little bit hard to be interactive with the audience, just the format of the virtual conference. But yeah, it was, I think, with the skills worksheet as well as the slides Hannah and Melissa had about kind of like why we assess our skills are all in our like folder from this event, as well as the list of questions we asked our panelists, and also like the surveys we sent out to IWB members, not both to ask like what kind of professional development topics you'd want to discuss, and we also sent a survey asking people to nominate mentors, which is where we got nominations for many of our panelists that we invited.
Yes, and I think myself and some of the other people that organized, and hopefully some other people that attended, can put in all of our notes. I know I have a whole page of notes from this that I can try to remake sense of and put them up there so that people have it if they were not able to attend.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
Well, if anyone has questions, we can take those in the last 5 minutes here.
I was just gonna say, kind of like the ABCDs, like we should also maybe like redo the skill assessment next year, and then kind of, I think that would be really, because I'm sure my skills have changed from 2020 than 2022. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it'd be interesting to like fill out the skills worksheet like each year and kind of see where you stand.
that was another wonderful summary of a big event in like 15 minutes. So thank you so much. And this is a beautiful slide. I love this.
Yeah, Katie did the slide. I will take zero credit for any of that. It was all her. But yes, like Katie said, we planned this for so long and planned such a wonderful in-person event that, like, I don't know, 2 months before maybe they were like, no. And then we were going to do it on Zoom, and then they were like, no.
Yeah, we did have, I didn't say it here, but at like the end, we had like a little bit of time, and they had this platform called Gather Town, if anyone's used that before, where it like kind of feels like being in a video game, but we like gathered in a little women in biomechanics space and chatted with the panelists and other attendees afterwards. But Yeah, we had more plans for kind of more formal like breakout rooms and things that the format didn't really accommodate well, but it was fun to at least have a little bit of chance to chat with folks after.
Well, yeah, thank you so much to that whole group for really representing IWB so well. That was, I think, our first IWB Women in Science event, like officially. So that was awesome. And yeah, that was all volunteer effort. So yeah, if anyone else here is interested in volunteering for a future Women in Science event, we're happy to help support you in any way and like give you that platform to do it. And yeah, thank you so much again, Kat, and to everyone that worked on the NACOB IWB events. Huge thank you. And I know I do a lot of the talking in these meetings, but I do want to give another big shout out to the monthly meeting committee that actually puts these together. So Ramanda Miller Dillon and Anna Maria Peter and Liz Bell, they are the monthly meeting committee, and they have, again, as we kind of started this meeting, they have a lot of events coming up. Every first Wednesday of the month is going to be the meeting, the IWB meeting. We're going to switch topics. We're going to rotate time zones so that hopefully we can at least grab you at a certain region. We can kind of be fair to all the regions of the world. And of course, we record these and we post them on our YouTube page. So with that, if anyone else has anything to say, otherwise I'll kind of close out the session for us. Big thank you to everyone again. I hope you have a great rest of your evenings.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. See ya.